Okay, happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome to today's session. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Craig Henry just to do the welcome, and then we can go around and do some introductions before we go through the agenda. So over to you, Mr. Henry.
Sure, thank you very much, Zena. Just a quick word to say thanks to you and your team, Zena, for facilitating this discussion. I hope it's very informative. As I may have informed you, and welcome, colleagues from the National Conservation Fund Consortium. I think I would have mentioned to you, Zena, that we are trying to have these opportunities to share information and knowledge out there within our Consortium of Caribbean Conservation Funds. And so the first opportunity I had, which I thought was useful, would be this specifically because it's an area, there are many interest points for various groupings, of course, and that's related to Seamoss production, market access issues, but of course, we also want to talk about carbon sequestration opportunities and so on and so forth related to that. So thanks to you all for being here, for agreeing to participate on both sides. And let's see how well, I'm hoping that we get some good information to take away. And of course, you're free to follow up with discussions with the team, wherever you feel like afterwards. So thanks once again, Zena, and then I'm handing over to you.
Thank you, Craig, and welcome everybody, and welcome to the people who've just joined the call. How we like to start these calls is just to do around the Zoom introduction. So if you can say your name and which company you're representing, that's useful for us just to get a log of everybody who's here. And we will be presenting, but this is a conversation. So if at any point there's any questions, please feel free to feedback. We do only have 60 minutes for today. And so I may move the conversation along, but as Craig said, this is a part of a journey, part of a conversation. So we will have future conversations individually with you and then hopefully collectively with everybody. So just for ease, I will say the name, and then if you do your introductions, just to kind of speed up the process. So on my screen, I can see Karen Panton.
Yes, morning again. I am with the Bahamas Protected Areas Fund, a part of the Consortium of Conservation Trust Funds in the Caribbean, a colleague of Craig, and I'm just very excited to be here with you all.
Thank you, Karen. Takiyah?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Takiyah Miller. I own a company called TeaMoss Shop. I'm out of Washington State in the US and have been in business for about just over 3 years. So I'm looking forward to sharing my story with you all.
Thank you, Takiyah. Jennifer James?
Let me speak on behalf of Jennifer. She's a colleague from Grenada, and I'm sure she would be happy given the interest in Seamoss. Jennifer, thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we can have a session with you after under more, I should say, positive circumstances or welcoming circumstances. But yeah, I'd like to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Aldwin?
Yes, sorry, my apologies. I'm Aldwin Andrews, Technical Officer for Sustainable Grenadines, transboundary non-governmental organization based on Union Island.
Thank you. Good to see you. Mugby? Hope I pronounced your name correctly. Mugby Pemberton.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Lemuel Pemberton, aka Mugabe, from the St. Christopher and Nevis Conservation Fund.
Thank you for joining, Mugabe. Sorry for mispronouncing your name. I see SDG Conservation Fund.
All right, good morning, everybody. Van Born Harry, CEO of the St. Vincent and Grenadines Conservation Fund. Looking forward to the discussion this morning.
Thank you. And Susgren, I see Susgren is on as well.
Hi, good morning. Christy Short, Program Manager with Sustainable Grenadines, Inc., joining in on the conversation. And if I can offer any input, I would do so.
Thank you. And Daniela, yeah?
Hi, I'm here from the National Conservation Trust Fund of Jamaica.
Great, thank you for joining. And Carlos?
Hi, I'm Carlos Lawrence from AAC Consultants. I work in remote development, supply chains, and certification programs.
Thank you. So thank you everybody for the introductions. As I said, we have about 45 minutes for this conversation, so it will be a fast conversation. We do have a lot of slides, but we will just kind of move through those quite quickly, just to make sure that we get an opportunity for conversation. So we will start the agenda with Takiyah Miller from TeaMoss Boss, who just introduced herself, because we thought it would be useful to have a case study of what's happening in the markets where people are setting up Seamoss businesses, what challenges are they having, and what support do we need to have to collaborate together onshore and in the islands to ensure we are able to build a sustainable supply chain. Carlos Lawrence, who you just had an introduction from, is working with us to look at compliance and regulation, and we'll give some background in terms of the work that we're looking at to be able to work with organizations in the Caribbean to put those in place, again, to support the industry. And there's some great case studies from Acai and the coffee industry, where there are some lessons learned for the Seamoss industry. We also work with a gentleman called Coffee Bempa from 54 Carbon, who's unable to be with us today as he's in Abidjan doing some energy deals at the moment, but I will speak to the carbon sequestration piece. He has said he is available in the following weeks to do a follow-up presentation for anybody who's interested. And then we can talk about next steps. I see a hand is raised from SVG Conservation Fund.
Yeah, thank you, Zena. If you can quickly reintroduce yourself, because I might have missed it.
Sure.
Yes.
So I'll do that introduction. So my name is Zena Collins. I am one half of Humble Kind Wise, which is a Seamoss brand, consumer product brand based in DC. My heritage is from the Caribbean. My parents are from the Caribbean, born in London, but live in the US with my husband and family. And came about Seamoss through a personal journey in terms of having alopecia issues and also trying to look at ways to boost our immune system. I was introduced to Seamoss in that way. My background is in consulting, so worked at Ernst & Young for about 15 years and was located in the Caribbean for 5 of those years. So worked with a number of Caribbean governments and local businesses to support economic development there and providing professional services. Very passionate about sustainability in the Caribbean. And so it's a dream come true to really work in this space and building a business that gets exports from the Caribbean. And as we were doing that, identified there were some issues, and so started to partner with people like ASC and Coffee 54 Carbon, and then meeting a number of other entrepreneurs and people within the region who are all committed to looking at ways where we can maximize the opportunity that's presented. So that's a high level view of kind of who we are. And so that really leads us to the fact that the marketplace is projected to reach 9.1 billion by 2024 in terms of the total seaweed market. And there is a growing opportunity in the United States and others to be able to sell Seamoss related products. But the biggest challenge is the fact that we don't have the right compliance and supply chain systems in place. And we want to make sure that we learn lessons from other industries which have grown exponentially, but at the cost of the local communities where they source the natural products from. Just again, a high level view, the Natural Products Expo, the world's largest we attended that ASC and I earlier this year. It's an event that ASC has been going to for over 15 years. And there were no Seamoss providers at that event, but a big interest in terms of the opportunity that exists. But again, what's stopping it is the compliance and regulation issues. Amazon presented at that conference, and one of the key insights that they provided in terms of the 197 million people that visit Amazon each month is there are 11 ingredients that are most searched, and Seamoss is currently one of those ingredients. So you can imagine how large the potential growth of the industry is. And currently that's been sourced from Asia, Africa, and as you know, some regions in the Caribbean as well. So I'm gonna hand over to Takiyah just to share her story, and then we can continue the presentation from there. So over to you, Takiyah.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name again is Takiyah Miller. I'm out of Washington State, and I've been, I actually learned about Seamoss just over 3 years ago during pandemic, because we were kind of in a state of fear and stay-at-home orders were in place, and everyone was trying to do their best to remain healthy. And there were a few people locally, one person specifically that was talking about Seamoss. And me personally, I was already into a lot of, natural, herbal, immune boosting product, black seed oil, mullein leaf, things of that sort. So hearing about Seamoss was like, let me check this out and give it a try. And I tried it and purchased it from a woman locally. I'm not quite sure what her background was in terms of how she came about it, but didn't really love how it tasted. And so I wanted to do a little bit more research in terms of how can I obtain this for myself, and what specifically is Seamoss, and where does it come from. And so I hopped on a lot of social media groups and did a lot of Google searches and started to join in on some of these online communities where I could just seek knowledge and information. And along the way, I met a few suppliers. And in that sense, it was an interesting kind of encounter, because purchasing out of the country was something very different for me. And especially in the form of purchase, because a lot of the small business local sellers, it was MoneyGram, Western Union. So it became how do I form this trust around this product that I'm seeking, that I'm not really quite familiar with. And I just worked really hard and diligently to build relationships. The first Seamoss that I ordered and tried was a purple Seamoss from Jamaica. And it wasn't necessarily easy to obtain. It was a sister team that sold it, and I believe their demand was essentially pretty high. So their website opened on Sundays occasionally, and you had to kind of just go in there and order before they closed the website. And then I met a woman from St. Lucia who reached out to me, and we kind of developed this friendship. And I asked her a lot of questions, and she was more than happy to be of support to my vision and answer my questions around Seamoss. One of my biggest concerns was not wanting to disrespect the cultures behind Seamoss, and everything being here in the States and not having had it or had knowledge of it before. So I started my company in that way, just kind of learning how to, clean it, soak it, blend it, create products out of it. I really went hard in 2021 in terms of becoming a vendor at my local events, selling my product, trying to educate people the best of my ability. And I've been vending and selling products online and also locally in my local communities for a year, just over a year now. And this past year, actually this past month, last year I was able to get health department permits to be able to sell it without issue. This year at a local vegetarian festival, I encountered some issues with one of my local health departments, one that had issued a permit to me last year with no issue. And the obstacle that I encountered was the health department saying, this is not safe. The local FDA contacted us and said, it's not safe. I got an email saying you are to immediately stop production and stop sales. And so it kind of spiraled into this journey of trying to figure out, who do I talk to? So between the FDA, local FDA, trying my best to educate my local health department and figure out how to come into a space of compliance. It was a nightmare, especially 4 days leading up to an event that I had already started preparing product for. So I have spent the past year really trying to be diligent in educating myself around everything that pertains to Seamoss and the capacity and the resources that I had. So I'm very grateful to have met Zena and taken a further dive into what this industry presents, the potential there, but also the education behind it, the respect of the environments where Seamoss comes from, the people that it impacts economically and environmentally. And I'm excited because I feel like there's a lot of opportunities to pioneer something within the states and within our respective countries and homes, where we can truly be a resource, educate people, but also grow in this kind of frontline opportunity. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Takiyah, for sharing. Again, I'm just conscious of time, so ask if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat and we will come back to them. So just giving the big picture, as you can hear, all of these components are reliant on each other in terms of there being technical and capacity building and environmental sustainability in the region, looking at the opportunities that exist for carbon sequestration that we'll talk about a bit later on, and then making sure that the product is regulated and certified so that the challenges that Takiyah describes we don't encounter, which obviously supports international trade and commerce. And so really the purpose of these conversations is, how do we connect the dots and increase our ability to collaborate together better and share knowledge? As Takiyah mentioned, there are a number of us who are building brands. Our business has been accepted by a DC Food Accelerator program, and we have the ability to market and get access to distribution in the stores to sell branded products, which obviously is good for everybody. But unless we are able to make sure it's scientifically safe and sustainable, and we have the knowledge to have these conversations with the FDA and the health departments, then ultimately what's going to happen is we are going to start finding ourselves being either fined or our businesses shut down. And what we found is when it happens to one Seamoss business, then the impact then reverberates. So as you can see, we're very clear in terms of our branding and our proposition, but we need to make sure that the supply chain in place is sustainable and is set up in a way that enables businesses to thrive and local farmers to sustain their livelihoods. This is an example of some of the notices that were put out for products. So as you'll see, in the Michigan area, there was a Seamoss lemonade gel product that had been recalled based on some potential health issues. So I'm going to hand over to Carlos Lawrence from ASC just to talk a bit about industries he's seen before, and then talk about some of the regulation compliance, and then we'll talk about carbon sequestration. If you have any questions, as I mentioned, please put them in the chat and we'll come back.
So this is a pretty common event in consumer history, is the discovery of a product that's not currently available in the markets that want to consume it. And it can happen slow, like it did in coffee over about 700 years, where trade happens to nearby and then Western and then internationally, including the spread of production. And, you know, even today, after all this time, coffee is still a slightly unbalanced trade situation that has environmental issues and worker health issues and things like that. Now, in time of accelerated communication, things like acai and camu that have come into use in the last 50 years, the growth rate and the explosion of the product without planning has accelerated those issues phenomenally, plus the fact that usually demand and growth can't keep up with the regional ability to produce. So the coffee has already been spread worldwide. So those fluctuations in demand don't really create a problem as much as they do in something like acai, where it's a very limited production area in Brazil, and the explosion has created a lot of environmental, social, economic, and competition issues in an area that's traditionally indigenous and naturally grown product. So as we move in towards this, we have two different issues to approach on an overall sustainability track. And one is planned development. So we know what our models are for each individual region, planning what maximum safe production is based on, you know, the human resources, the environmental impacts, those kinds of things. And then this other issue where, unlike coffee, which is a dried, fairly stable product, Seamoss has a high water content in its natural state and isn't necessarily going to go through what's called a kill step. Coffee is always roasted. So not only is green coffee fairly low in bacteriological cultures, then you're going to roast it. And so you've got a kill step in its use. That's not the case with Seamoss, and it's a new product. And the FDA, for products that have existed for ages, such as dairy, juice, things like that, they have very specific rules to follow. You know how to bring a juice to market. There's a step-by-step plan you can get from the FDA. But when you bring a new market to product that is biologically complex and has a high water content like Seamoss, you need to do what's called a process authority approach, where you design a way to prepare it for the market that's scientifically proven and validated. And then you submit that to the FDA and get that as the approved process. And hopefully, once you've done that, you create an industry standard. As Zena was saying, once you have one bad incident, it spreads like wildfire, particularly if the FDA picks up on it. And suddenly the product is banned, whether or not your product is safe, because not enough has been done to prove the safety, to market the safety, and to register the safety of it with the FDA and importing agencies. So that would be our goal, is to basically do a sustainable plan for its development, so the communities and the environments in which it's grown are sustainable, and to develop a process for handling it and importing it that creates a standard of safety, so that all producers can have a standardized way in which to do it, and we can create confidence in the import and the health and safety markets, both here, Europe, and around the world, that we have a standardized, scientifically proven process to create a safe product to market. Zena?
Thank you, Carlos. And so that takes us nicely to the ecosystem of key stakeholders and the importance of export, conservation, and private sector working together with the farmers and certification organizations to be able to, and governments to be able to make sure that the industry is developed. And so I'll talk a bit about, there are some principles which we've been exploring with Carlos and looking at the various different certifications and standardization organizations like MSC and ASC, who have a seaweed standard in place, and looking at whether that would be the right principle, those would be the right principles to follow for the seaweed or Seamoss market. As I mentioned, Kofi Bempah, one of the co-founders of 54 Carbon, can't be here with us, and I must just put my hands up. I'm not a carbon sequestration expert, but I can talk to some of the kind of headlines just to start the discussion. And any other questions you have, I can follow up with Kofi, or we can have a follow-up conversation to dig a little bit deeper. But in terms of who 54 Carbon are, they are an offshoot of a bigger company that Kofi is a founder of, which focuses in renewable energy. And based on the relationships in the renewable energy space, they were able to identify that there was also an opportunity to help companies who are looking to offset their carbon emissions, who cannot do that independently and need to partner with projects in order to do that, to connect those big corporate companies with projects on the ground that can help them to offset their emissions. So 54 Carbon has been set up essentially like a broker between the two. They have essentially been doing their key projects in the African continent, and in our conversation with them and exploring the opportunity within the Caribbean, we identified that Seamoss acts very similar to a forest, where it acts as a carbon sink that can absorb CO2 gases. The carbon sequestration industry is currently a billion-dollar industry, and is projected to triple in the next few years. And the way that it works is that each unit of CO2 that is captured can be converted into a carbon credit, which has a monetary value that can be sold at market value, creating another revenue stream for governments to support conservation issues, social issues, and economic issues as well. There are two crediting programs that are the biggest, most recognized. One is called Vera, which is the largest, and then another one called Gold Standard. And they help to verify the validity of a carbon sequestration project. So what 54 Carbon and we've been exploring in conversations with various different locations in the Caribbean around Seamoss is there an opportunity to work with local governments to identify spaces that produce Seamoss and identify those as carbon sequestration projects, where the carbon credits could be sold to companies in exchange for revenue. And there are a number of case studies that they've been working on in the African continent. One in particular is the Ivory Coast project, where they have been given a concession by the government for 100 hectares of land for a reforestation project, because about 80% of their forests have been destroyed by cocoa farming. So the agreement supports the ability for governments to work with the private sector to support their conservation aims, as well as social and economic opportunities by replanting forests and indigenous plants and species in that region. So there are a number of benefits. The biggest challenge with the Caribbean is the scale and size. So as you can imagine, the bigger the scale, the more carbon credits are available. So even though an island may not have the capacity to do a very large carbon sequestration project independently, if collectively the region work together, there's an opportunity to do, a large Seamoss, for example, carbon sequestration initiative as a collective region. So those are some of the things that in previous conversations with Craig, we saw an opportunity to like have a discussion to explore the possibilities of that. As I mentioned, I'm not an expert, but I do have some insights based on the number of conversations that I've been in with coffee in this conversation. So for the last 25 minutes, I wanted just to open up the floor just to see if there are any comments or questions that have come out of what we've presented and shared so far.
Hi, good morning. This is Daniela from Jamaica. A couple comments. So essentially we would be promoting Seamoss harvesting, right? But there is also a particular demand on the market for wild crafted Seamoss and not necessarily harvested Seamoss. So yes, there is a demand for Seamoss, but it's particular. So I mean, there's an issue of sustainability in the sense where if they over harvest wild crafted Seamoss, I mean, you know, when it's removed and in a sustainable way, it grows back like everything else. It's not completely depleted, but I've seen in instances in Jamaica where like fishing, there's overfishing. It's hard to control something that is so high in demand, and in particular, wild crafted Seamoss is in demand versus harvested. Is that the word that we're going to be using? Seamoss. So it's is there like a particular market? Do you see a challenge there in pushing harvested Seamoss, or it's not really you wouldn't see a concern of the wider market? Because I've experienced that is especially like Europeans and like family members from the UK, they would want to say, make sure that it's well-crafted Seamoss. They're very specific.
Yes. So just to speak to that, thank you for your question, Daniela, this is part of the reason why we want to become, you know, one of the most knowledgeable brands and working with people like Takiyah and other brands to re-educate the market. So they're similar to the 92 of 102 vitamins that were put on some of the marketing packages, and people have just copied that. And we've done our testing. So we sent our Seamoss off to labs to be tested. And in conversation with ASC consultants, we've identified that, you know, there are only certain nutrients you can test for. So a number of those claims are false, and they've just been copycatted. And that's similar to the wild crafted message, where it's just been copycatted from people who have put viral videos out. But as you will know, wild crafted isn't the most sustainable way to grow Seamoss. And so what is more important to consumers now is just being educated in terms of what is the most sustainable way to source their products. So I think the wild crafted conversation is more of a education piece rather than a real market barrier.
So my follow-up question on that, have you tested a wild one that is said to be wild crafted versus one that is harvested? Is it similar? Because I know that there are some that are like pool grown, and that's are some of the things that do determine, as you said, there are a lot of copycats. It could be just regular harvested Seamoss or even pool grown Seamoss, and it's branded as wild crafted Seamoss. You'll never know. But has there ever been like from your consultants a testing of both to see if they contain similar or close in nutrient value?
So when, just to clarify, so when we talk about wild crafted and farmed, they're both in the ocean. They're not in a pool. It's just that, you know, the myth is, you know, one grows naturally off of the rocks and so has more nutrition that it pulls from the rocks, which isn't true. And so there's myths around what well-crafted means. So again, it's an education piece in terms of also the countries being responsible in terms of not promoting well-crafted as better, because they're both from the sea. So they're not going to be any different from that perspective. One is just more sustainable than the other. And we can do testing, but what we've tested is Seamoss that is from the sea, and it would come from the same place that the well-crafted Seamoss would come from as the farm Seamoss. And again, that conversation around testing, there are costs associated to that. So we have been paying for the cost to test. And so we have two costs onshore, which is ultimately we would just be testing our gel products and the byproducts. But because the work hasn't been done in the Caribbean to do the testing, we have to pay for the raw product to be tested as well. And which is part of the challenge that Takiyah was talking about in terms of sourcing and not being able to have the paperwork from the sellers in the Caribbean to be able to verify where the Seamoss has come from. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Not really, because I mean, the market, and if you're like a herbalist or, you know, big in with health, people, I mean, you can sustainably harvest wild-crafted products. It doesn't have to be, but I mean, there's a big challenge. How do you know it's sustainably being harvested? Because like overfishing, we don't stop fishing, but we say you have to sustainably fish, right? And they're all from the sea. So, I mean, from a perspective, for example, it would take a lot of work to do that convincing that it would have the same, a harvested Seamoss would have the same nutritional value as one that has been naturally grown, just naturally grown, because of simply just other comparisons. Like even in the UK, I've been in the UK and I would have siblings that say, oh, no, we don't eat cucumber here. Cucumber should have seeds. You know, I've never seen a cucumber without seeds until I've been to the UK. So, I mean, there are things to compare, but if there is evidence that there is no great or difference in the nutritional value between wild-crafted and harvested Seamoss, that would be a big and significant discovery, and it would require a lot of re-education on the market.
Okay, that's
well.
Sorry.
I did want to point out one thing here is our goal here is to find commonalities between the production, processing, and the areas engaged in it, so that we're all following a sustainable and a marketable model that's safe. And your issues with your product as a wild grown are not much different than the ones with the farmed model. As a matter of fact, the MSC ASC standard has a model both for farming and for wild collection. So you would want to be sure that whatever process your area is using, they're following a sustainable standard and would be certified to that. The difference between the two would be a marketing issue, and it would be up to local governments as to whether they want to promote one over the other or both, as long as they're following a model. On the issue of safety, the processing models are identical. And that's been one of the major issues, is having a proven model that how it's handled brings to market a safe product, so you can import it into the buying countries without pushback. So although there may be some difference from the marketing side and analysis that needs to be done, as a group, we can solve the issues of sustainability and safety, no matter how it's produced, and leave it up to the islands as to which ones they want to promote, what provides the best economic benefit, what provides the most sustainability, but we have models for both.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Carlos.
but just again, I'm gonna just comment and just leave the comments there. The thing is, markets do matter, and there are specific requirements when it comes to certain natural products from my own experience. And I mean, if there can remove our re-education around people are buying Seamoss because initially it's for health and nutritional value, right? You want the most healthy thing. And if somebody's out there telling you that wild-crafted Seamoss has greater nutritional value than harvested Seamoss that is still in the sea, it is a roadblock to scaling harvested Seamoss.
Yeah,
So
I think
if I missed, sorry, Zena, if I may
No, go ahead.
interject here. So Daniela Odwin Andrews from Sustainable Grenadines. I fully understand where you're coming from, and I do agree with the sentiments expressed. But as Carlos had said in the initial stage, and it's a fact, Seamoss has been around for decades, way before it has been exposed to the international market. But now it's relatively new. And for instance, you're right. I was in the States and in Whole Foods. If it's not wildcraft, then it's not healthy and you do not get the sale, right? We understand that part. But again, as Carlos said, we have to continue doing our models and the educational part. That depends on us. When I say us, not just the farmers and the stakeholders, but from a national standpoint. So this is where I'm going to expand more now to say that there's going to be a need for a lot of collaborative effort from a national standpoint, the marketing agents, stakeholders, farmers, and everyone involved in order for us to achieve this objective, Daniela. And quite frankly, what you're saying again, I'll say that I do agree with you, but it's not a stumbling block. I personally don't see it as a stumbling block because it's just a matter of us actually taking control of this and doing the educational part of it, because in plain sight, farming Seamoss is more sustainable than doing it wildcraft, because we all living in the Caribbean, we all do the farming, we all see what it is. You leave Seamoss in an area for a period of time, it grows, yes, in abundance, but when you have multiple persons, a couple hundred persons going to just take it out of that one area where it grows wild, then how fast can it regenerate for us to supply the market? Now, when you contain it in the farms that we have, obviously it grows more, and then you have that limit and control on it.
Thank you for that, Eldwin. I noticed that, Karen, there was a message or a question from you, so I just want to make sure we get to that question and respond to that.
Sure. So what I really want to know, and forgive me, I'm really impressed by the volume of trade with the Seamoss. I had no idea, so I'm really thrilled to be here. $9.1 billion is no little money when you look at it from a Caribbean perspective. But I wanted to ask, are we talking about two different types of Seamoss? Are we talking about two different ways of farming it, growing it, as it relates to the trade and the cultivation, and then the carbon sequestration aspects? What are we doing? Because they seem to be going in different directions or canceling out one another. Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, sure. So I can try and provide some clarity. So just in terms of the number you saw of seaweed, that's seaweed in terms of the total market, seaweed market. And there are various different types of seaweed that are classified within that. But just for a more specific example, in conversation with Export St. Lucia, they noted that in 2017, they were exporting $50,000 worth of Seamoss. By 2020, it went up to, I think the number was it 5 million, Craig, the number in terms of export from St. Lucia?
Yes. Yeah.
So it went up to 5 million. So that was definitely exponential growth. And to your specific question about carbon sequestration, it's not two different activities. It's just the ability to be able to monetize the process and generate revenue from the process from another source. So the Seamoss farming would be happening, and because it's happening, it is absorbing CO2 gases and creating a carbon sink naturally. And as a result of that, it could potentially qualify to be part of a carbon sequestration program that then would make it eligible to sell carbon credits once it was verified as a verifiable carbon sequestration project by one of those verification agencies I mentioned earlier, Vera or Gold Standard, to be able to sell credits to companies.
Sorry, so you're talking two distinct uses for the seaweed, the Seamoss. One set is for harvesting, cultivation, sale, and one set is for carbon sequestration, because
yes, but it could be the same source.
How do you do that though? I mean, if you're monetizing the Seamoss for carbon sequestration, you can't harvest it and sell it.
But the idea is it would be replenished over 6 to 12 weeks. And so it would have to be part of a program.
It grows that quickly. Okay, all right. I would say that we really would need more information on the carbon sequestration side. It's the side that would be of interest to my organization as a environmental trust fund. But I certainly would be able to interact with some of my colleagues who may be interested in the sale of Seamoss. And we do have a Bahamian who is doing a very brisk business in Seamoss cultivation and trade, like Seamoss gels and so forth. At one point, he was at $500,000 in sales a month, but he's based in Florida. Might have heard him, he was on Shark Tank or something. But as a whole, apart from him and another organization, New Life or something, it's not a product that we have invested a lot of research in or time in here locally. So I'm very curious as to where it can go. Thank you.
Craig, I think you were going to say something.
No, I'm good, thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, so we can organize another meeting specifically with coffee. Bempa, who is an expert in it, and he can provide sort of the information and details. But the biggest challenge is the scale. In terms of the bigger the scale, the more ability you are to access the carbon sequestration opportunity.
Gotcha.
I wanted to answer. I know there was a question after I spoke about me being back to selling product here in Washington State. Essentially, I got this news 4 days before my event, and the fight was regarding GROS compliance and also Seamoss being considered an additive. So there's kind of this ambiguity between a supplement versus food. A lot of us combine Seamoss with, say, fruit or lemonades, things like that. And essentially, I was told that I could market it as a skincare product, but not to consume it at the event that I did. I was also told that if I wanted it added to a drink like lemonade, I had to give the customer Seamoss in a form where they could add it themselves, but I was not allowed to combine it and sell it as a food. So that was probably one of the most frustrating aspects of that weekend. In terms of testing, even finding local labs, I spent a lot of time that week trying to call local labs and see if I could do the testing, which kept getting quoted to in the $1,000 range. Sorry, I kind of took notes. In terms of even like the capsules, supplements, things like that, that's been allowed. But even talking to the FDA, it was, you're not allowed to ship it. You're not allowed to, sell it out of state. So there's a lot of barriers still in place regarding, selling Seamoss locally and even nationally here. Even with the FDA and the health department locally, I think education is the biggest piece and factor, because a lot of people don't know the types of Seamoss that have been in the market. Carrageenan, food thickeners, it being in ice cream and a lot of other products that we've come up on. But it's even educating local health departments and other CMOS companies, and debunking a lot of the myths like Zena mentioned, in terms of people just kind of taking what's been out there virally and running with it. So I hope that answers. I can't remember who asked the question about if I'm back in.
Daniela.
Oh, Danielle, yeah.
I just want to also respond to SVG Conservation Fund's question. I thought, Carlos, you may be able to respond to that in terms of where can you find or get the recognized sustainable standards? Is it that the product from the Caribbean are not following the sustainable standards?
Well, you have to choose one that fits your model. They're available on the certifier's website or the organizations that support the certification agency. MSC ASC standards is a joint standard between the Marine Stewardship Council and another council that specializes in seaweed. I've chosen that one mainly because it covers a broad area, such as both farmed seaweed and wild harvested seaweed. And it has an implementation standard that's easier to do on a newer product that doesn't have established practices. So they allow you to basically develop practices and get certified as you prove out your standards, rather than hitting a bunch of predetermined control points that may not be achievable in the first year or two. So it's a good way to go, but there are other standards out there for ocean conservation that you can search and find what their requirements are. Some local governments, particularly when they are in large coastal exposure areas, will have their own regional or government standards. So you need to be aware of that and make sure that your standard fits within the controls of the government also. But I would say just choose one that works well for the organization and use it as broadly as possible. I think one of the problems that she was talking about is the confusion in the health department is there's not enough commonality and understanding of the product. People see it as just the source of carrageenan, and so they treat it under the standards of carrageenan, which has consumption limits and all kinds of other controls, when it's actually the entire product. It would be like treating cornstarch like corn. Of course, you're not going to eat an entire plate of cornstarch, but you might sit down and eat an entire cob of corn. But that education on a brand new product to most consumers needs to take place at an institutional level. So the FDA knows what's going on. They're issuing the right directives. There are directives to what's safe for dairy, what's safe for meat, what's safe for fish. There aren't any for what's safe for Seamoss. So that needs to happen at an institutional level so that you can have more consistent rules and you don't get caught at the last minute with someone. And some of what she was saying, it's just what health departments do. When they don't know, they want to cover their own actions by making you do things that don't seem to make a lot of sense. It's just fear, institutional fear.
All right.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you for that. I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind. Now, all the problems, issues that have been explained here so far in this conversation seems to be related to the American market, but is it the same for the European market?
Yes, it's a global issue.
Okay.
So is your focus then on educating and coming up with the standards that will sort of regulate the trade of Seamoss? What is the next steps for you? And maybe I wanted to tell the young lady from Washington that maybe she needs to go to a different state. Takiyah I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. TeaMoss.
Yeah, Takiyah.
Yeah, maybe it's time to move elsewhere where it's a little bit more friendly, more relaxed and liberated. But so what is the next step? Are we thinking about how do we get, again, more regulation or common understandings or what? What's the next step from here?
Yeah, so the next step is one of the first steps is these conversations in terms of identifying who all the stakeholders are. And so really grateful to Craig Henry for bringing you all on this conversation. But so it's having conversations with all of the islands to find out what are some of the barriers to trade, and then see what already exists, because we don't know everything, and we recognize there is some knowledge, a lot of knowledge in the islands, in the region. And so it's just making sure that we are understanding what the current state is first. And then the second piece is, to Carlos's point, if there is no standard, then working collaboratively to explore what is the best standard to put in place. And from the research we've been doing, it's the MSC. So we've been having conversations with them to find out, what does that standard look like, how viable that is, and bringing that knowledge and sharing that knowledge in a collaborative way, so we can all work together to solve this problem, because we can't be successful as entrepreneurs if the regions that we're getting the resources from aren't successful and benefiting from it. And so this is the first part of a broader conversation. And what we've learned along this sort of 12-month journey is there are three parts to that. And one is the onshore, is the entrepreneurs and the business and the regulations and the compliance piece, the growers collectives in terms of the farmers and how we make that sustainable, and then the government in terms of, and the NGOs in terms of how do we make sure this doesn't damage the ecosystem based on the lessons learned that Carlos shared earlier from other industries, and how do we make this attractive for export and for governments to put in the right environments and conditions to make this possible from a private and public partnership perspective that has a triple bottom line effect in terms of economically, socially, and environmentally. So that's kind of where we see the next steps. Does that answer your question, Karen?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I just put a note in there for Takiyah about checking in with Alexio Gibson, Bayman living in Florida, who seems to be doing extremely well. He may have some insight that may be helpful for her.
So what's interesting about that story is marketing and social media spread a particular message, but the issues are still the same. And what happens is the problems just become bigger. So when he was on Shark Tank, he talked about sourcing it from St. Lucia. And then on his website, it says he's sourcing it from Jamaica. And then just the stuff on social media, there's a 4 to 5 week waiting time to get his product. So
wow. Interesting. Okay. I'm educated. I feel educated.
So, and this is why it's just all important for us to have these conversations, because us solving these problems is a win for all of us. And it's just figuring out, how do we do that collectively? So I recognize we're slightly over time, so I just want to be respectful of everybody's time. But was there any other questions that anybody had, or please feel free to follow up with Craig or myself afterwards, and we can schedule another conversation around carbon sequestration specifically, or any other areas that are helpful. I'll hand over to you, Craig, to close out.
Sure, colleagues. I'm sure that you've, like Karen, have learned a few things and probably can add more to the conversations. I know it's just a brief time, and but I would want some feedback from you, my colleagues, to if you have any additional questions, and as well if you feel that perhaps you may want to have a one-on-one with Zena and her colleagues, that's fine as well, because we do recognize that there are different things happening on different islands. However, one of the things that I would want us to consider as conservation funds is that there are some dual or there are some commonalities, and there's some things that we should try to aspire to. And that is one, helping, perhaps we have grantees whom we support, perhaps we're doing livelihood activities that relate to Seamoss production. We are probably supporting areas in terms of the sustainable use of marine resources that include Seamoss production. but as well, thinking of innovative ways to expand the sector and supporting national governments. The one thing that I really want to see if we could do was in St. Lucia, we have been trying to work with the agencies is to look at this issue with regards to the standards, because I feel that more than anything else, that's going to impact the viability of the industry for some time to come. Because if the little issues start cropping up and they can be blown out of proportion, even to the point where the product cannot be moved, then it makes no sense. So I would feel as a priority that looking at see how we can contribute to having some standards across the region and really having those serious conversations with agencies, with the Seamoss farmers themselves, whatever it is. Probably will just be facilitating it or just doing the mere introductions, which I have done so far. But I feel that there is some attention that needs to be paid, and we have a role in that regard. So with that, I would say thanks to all of you. Again, there'll be information related to this. We will submit the recording. Zena and her team's contact. Zena, did you forward that in the chat? I think you should. So just in case anybody wants to reach out to you, they can feel free to do so. And I'd like to thank both you and Carlos and Takiyah for your submissions today, for your interacting with us today, and hopefully that leads to something productive and useful to the region sometime medium to long term. Thanks all.
Right.
Yes.
Very quickly, maybe we need some sort of development agency to help us bring this together and to provide the clout that's necessary to have these regulations or put in place. When you bring in the development agencies and you have their muscle behind you, sometimes it helps to clear the way. Thinking IDB or whomever else may be in the Eastern Caribbean working with yourselves, but certainly having a sort of partnership, some sort of PPP with them, and not only from the regulations, the policy aspects, but also from maybe perhaps some seed funding, the carbon sequestration as well. It may be helpful. Yeah, that's in hindsight, thinking about it, it may help.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. And
Sure.
There's a comment just to respond to Mugabe, your question on seeding. Carlos mentioned that MSC standard addressed that as a principal issue. You do not have, sorry, Carlos, I'm misreading your message. If you could.
Basically, because they realize it's a principal issue in sustainability, they basically ask you how you're managing seeding. So do you have your own seeding program? Is your seeding program evaluating the native environment and how you will maintain growth? Because they expect natural disasters and they expect environmental issues to have an impact on it. And they want a balance between what you're dealing with in the natural environment and the effect you're having on it, that makes sure your seed stock is healthy, it represents the native flora, and it doesn't displace species that are growing there.
Thank you. So with that, we'll be in touch, and thank you all for your time. Great to connect with you.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great one, everybody. Have a great day.
Everyone have a good
Thanks.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.